Welcome, curious souls, to a place where reality bends and the impossible becomes eerily familiar. Here in the shadows between what we know and what we fear, stories await that will challenge your perception of the world around you. Each tale invites you to step beyond the veil of the ordinary, where strange occurrences have no easy explanation, and the lines between nightmare and waking life blur into unsettling harmony. From psychological terrors to supernatural encounters, our carefully curated collection offers a window into worlds just adjacent to our own, worlds where the rules we take for granted no longer apply. So dim your lights, silence your phone, and prepare to journey into the unknown with us, and glimpse into madness. Tonight, we venture into the digital shadows where identity becomes nothing more than pixels arranged in familiar patterns. In our perpetually connected world, we trade convenience for privacy, our images scattered across the digital landscape like fallen leaves. But what happens when your face, your most personal identifier, is no longer truly yours? When the mirror shows a reflection that belongs to everyone but you? Step with us now into a world where recognition becomes a curse, where fame brings infamy, and where the ultimate horror is seeing yourself everywhere. A true glimpse into madness. Lena Maris closed her laptop with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 failed auditions. Another rejection, another form email praising her obvious talent while explaining that they were going in a different direction. 7 years in Los Angeles had taught her the true meaning of that phrase. Her face wasn't memorable enough, distinctive enough, or marketable enough. Generic, one casting director had called her with casual cruelty, the kind of face you'd expect to see in a crowd. Her phone buzzed with a text from her agent. "Nothing yet on the commercial. Keep your chin up." Lena tossed the phone onto her threadbare couch. Rent was due in 3 days, and her bank account had dwindled to its last few $100s. The endless cycle of waitressing between auditions had worn her spirit thin. She'd started to wonder if it was time to admit defeat and return to Ohio. The email arrived that evening. Subject line, "Your face has value." Under normal circumstances, Lena might have deleted it as spam, but desperation has a way of lowering one's guard. The message was from a company called IllumaVision, claiming to be a tech startup specializing in digital character generation. They were seeking face models for their background character AI system and were offering $10,000 for a single scanning session. "Your facial structure contains excellent neutral parameters," the email explained. "Perfect for our base algorithmic model. Your likeness would only appear in non-speaking background roles." 3 days later, Lena sat in a sterile white room as cameras captured every angle of her face. The technicians were efficient and detached, treating her like a specimen rather than a person. The company's representative, a woman with sharp features and sharper eyes, slid the contract across the table. "Standard NDA," she explained. "You won't be able to discuss the specifics of our technology, but you retain your rights to personal publicity. Your likeness will only be used for background characters, crowd scenes, extras, that sort of thing." Lena's hand hovered over the signature line. Something felt off, but the check for $10,000 was already made out in her name. With rent looming and no jobs on the horizon, did she really have a choice? Her signature was barely dry when the scans began. 2 weeks passed. Lena had paid her rent and even splurged on groceries that didn't come from the dollar store. She was watching a new crime drama when she first noticed it. In a courtroom scene, sitting 3 rows back, a woman who looked exactly like her. Not similar, not reminiscent. It was her face. At first, it was thrilling. She began spotting herself everywhere, walking through a mall in a commercial, sitting at a cafe in a romantic comedy, standing in line at a bank in a thriller. Her face had found work everywhere she hadn't. "I'm actually on TV," she told herself, taking screenshots whenever she spotted her digital doppelgangers. It felt like success, even if no one knew it was her. Then came the news report. A jewelry store robbery in San Diego, caught on grainy security footage. The suspect's face was blurred but somewhat visible. It was Lena's face. The news anchor's voice echoed in her small apartment. Police have released this image in connection with the ongoing manhunt. Her hands trembling, Lena dialed IllumaVision's number. Disconnected. Their website returned a 404 error. Their office address led to an empty suite with a "for lease" sign in the window. Over the following weeks, Lena's face appeared in increasingly disturbing contexts. A viral video showed her screaming racial slurs at a flight attendant. A political ad featured her endorsing a candidate she despised. Late one night, scrolling through dark corners of the internet, she found pornographic videos with her face digitally grafted onto the actresses' bodies. She hired a digital removal service, but they came back with disturbing news. Her face had been registered as an open-source asset. Thousands of users had already downloaded, modified, and redistributed it. The digital genie couldn't be put back in the bottle. The real-world consequences began soon after. A man followed her out of a grocery store, calling her a whore. Another recognized her as that racist bitch from the airplane. A woman at a bus stop took one look at Lena and called the police, claiming she was the con artist who had scammed her mother. Lena cut and dyed her hair, wore oversized sunglasses, and applied makeup to alter her features. None of it helped. Her face had become notorious in ways she couldn't track or understand. The police arrived on Tuesday morning. A hit and run had left a child in critical condition. Traffic cameras had captured the driver's face, Lena's face. It took 12 hours and 3 witness statements to prove she had been at an audition when the accident occurred. The officer looked at her with a mix of suspicion and pity. "You might want to lay low for a while. Your face is becoming a bit of a problem." That night, walking home, Lena passed a digital billboard cycling through advertisements. Her face appeared selling toothpaste with an unnaturally white smile. Something inside her snapped. She picked up a rock from a nearby planter and hurled it at the screen. The glass cracked, distorting her digital smile into a fractured grimace. The security camera above the billboard captured it all. By morning, the incident had gone viral. Woman attacks own image in billboard meltdown. Desperate for answers, Lena traced the earliest appearances of her digital doubles through online forums. A username kept appearing, Pixel Phantom. After days of negotiation, they agreed to meet. Pixel Phantom turned out to be a college student with acne scars and nervous eyes. He explained that IllumaVision's prototype had been hacked and leaked months ago. The algorithm that contained Lena's face had become the foundation for a new generation of deepfake software. "Your face was chosen because it's structurally neutral," he explained without emotion. "It maps easily onto other faces. The software uses it as a base template before applying modifications." "There must be some way to fix this," Lena pleaded. The hacker looked at her with something approaching pity. "You're not real to them. You're just a face." That night, Lena recorded a video explaining her situation, begging for understanding. She posted it online, only to find comments calling it meta-horror art and praising her commitment to the performance. No one believed the truth. Then came the final blow. While watching a live stream of a bank robbery in progress, Lena saw herself holding a gun on terrified tellers. The timestamp showed it happening at that exact moment, while she sat alone in her apartment. Reality began to slip. If her face could be in 2 places at once, could she trust what she saw in the mirror? Was she the original Lena, or just another variation? The thought consumed her. She abandoned her apartment and went into hiding, covering her face with scarves and masks long before such things became commonplace. She dyed her hair weekly, tried colored contacts, even considered more drastic measures. But her face had become public property, a digital template impossible to reclaim. 6 months into her self-imposed exile, police cornered her at a motel off Highway 15. A vigilant citizen had recognized her as the woman wanted for a series of armed robberies across 3 states. Her protestations of innocence fell on deaf ears. The evidence was on camera, after all. In her cell, Lena watched the small television in the common area. A new actress was making headlines for her breakout role in an indie film. Critics praised her every-person quality and relatable features. The face on the screen was Lena's own. After a psychiatric evaluation deemed her delusional, Lena was transferred to a secure mental health facility. The doctors spoke in hushed tones about identity dysphoria and digital psychosis. They didn't believe her story. How could they when her face appeared in normal context daily? On her third day in the facility, Lena stared into the small mirror above the sink in her room. For a moment, her reflection seemed solid, recognizable. Then it flickered, subtly changing. She blinked hard, and when she opened her eyes, she saw the doctor's face reflected where hers should be. She turned to find him standing behind her, but in the mirror, both their faces were identical. Both were hers. She looked around the room in panic. The orderly checking her chart, the patient shuffling past her door, the nurse adjusting her IV, all wore her face, flickering between their identities and hers like a digital glitch. Lena closed her eyes, her lips forming words barely above a whisper. I don't know who I am anymore, and neither does anyone else. The security camera in the corner captured her whisper. By morning, it would become the latest horror trend online, performed by 1,000 different people, all wearing Lena's face. In our quest for recognition, we sometimes forget the value of anonymity, the freedom to be unknown, to belong solely to ourselves. Lena's cautionary tale reminds us that identity is not merely what others see, but what we know ourselves to be. In a world increasingly filled with artificial realities and synthetic truths, perhaps the most precious possession is not fame or fortune, but the simple certainty that when we look in the mirror, we recognize the person looking back. For without that certainty, we become like Lena, everywhere and nowhere, seen by all but truly visible to none. The final draft. Consider, if you will, a man trapped between ambition and desperation. Thomas Reed, a struggling author whose dreams of literary success have been reduced to a blinking cursor and the bottom of a bourbon bottle. What he seeks is inspiration. What he'll find is something far more sinister. For Mr. Reed is about to acquire a peculiar antique with a history of turning fiction into reality and reality into nightmare. Tonight's feature presentation tells the tale of a Faustian bargain written in blood and ink, where success comes at the ultimate price. Tonight, a cautionary tale of creativity and consequence as we take a glimpse into madness. Thomas Reed slouched in his worn office chair, staring at the blank document that had taunted him for weeks. The cursor blinked with metronome persistence, a visual reminder of his failure. 3 unpublished manuscripts gathered dust in his desk drawer, and his current project was going nowhere. The bottle of bourbon beside his keyboard was down to its final inches, a companion that had grown too familiar these past months. His phone buzzed. Thomas winced before checking the screen. Dorothy Kemp, his agent. The 4th call this week. He let it go to voicemail, then reluctantly pressed play when the notification appeared. Thomas, it's Dorothy again. Simon at Pinnacle Press is breathing down my neck. They need at least 3 chapters by the end of the month, or they're invoking the delay clause. That means returning the advance, Thomas. All of it. I've stuck my neck out for you, but I can't hold them off any longer. Call me back, please. Thomas deleted the message and poured another drink. The $12,000 advance had seemed like a lifeline 6 months ago. Now it was an anchor dragging him toward financial ruin. Most of it had already gone to rent and bills during his creative process, a euphemism for the worst writer's block of his career. He'd tried everything, writing in cafes, writing in parks, writing drunk like Hemingway, sober like King, at dawn like Murakami. Nothing worked. The words came out stilted and lifeless, when they came at all. One great book, he muttered into his glass. Just one breakthrough, and everything changes. Thomas had been saying this for years. His novels weren't bad, just forgettable. Competent genre fiction that couldn't find a publisher in an increasingly competitive market. But Pinnacle had taken a chance on him, offered a modest deal for his thriller about an art thief. The problem was he couldn't seem to finish the damn thing. He worked until 3 a.m., typing and deleting the same paragraph over and over before finally passing out at his desk, cheek pressed against the keyboard. When he woke 5 hours later, his document remained stubbornly empty except for a string of gibberish where his face had rested. Thomas showered, downed 3 aspirin with cold coffee, and returned to his desk. He closed the mocking blank document and opened his email, hoping for any distraction. Between credit card payment reminders and promotional newsletters was a local message board notification that made him sit up straight. Estate sale. Collection of Mitchell Graves this weekend only. Mitchell Graves. Thomas had devoured his books in college, dark psychological suspense novels that had taken the literary world by storm in the 1950s before Graves vanished from public life. The listing mentioned writer's effects among the items for sale. Thomas checked his bank account, $241.37, and his calendar, nothing but looming deadlines. He should spend the day writing. He should call Dorothy back. He should act like a professional. Instead, he grabbed his keys. The estate sale was being held at a faded Victorian on the outskirts of town. A small crowd picked through tables of old books, furniture, and household items. Thomas made his way through the rooms until he found what he was looking for: a small desk in the corner with a typewriter perched atop it. An elderly woman with sharp eyes noticed his interest. "That belonged to Mitchell Graves himself," she said, voice dropping to a reverent whisper. "Wrote all his bestsellers on it." Thomas ran his fingers over the keys of the vintage 1938 Underwood. Its black finish gleamed despite its age, not a speck of dust on its frame. The price tag read $200, nearly all the money he had left. "Did you know him?" Thomas asked. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly. "My aunt was his housekeeper. She kept this after he left, said it was too valuable to discard. He disappeared, right? Never found?" "Some mysteries are better left unsolved," she replied. Then, with a sudden eagerness, "I'll take $150 for it. Includes a ribbon and cleaning kit." Thomas hesitated. He couldn't afford it. He needed groceries, not an antique. "You're a writer," she said. "It wasn't a question. I can tell. This machine has a history of helping writers find their voice, their true stories." Thomas should have walked away. Instead, he counted out his last meaningful dollars and carried the heavy typewriter to his car, telling himself this tangible connection to literary greatness might be exactly what he needed. Back home, Thomas carefully set the Underwood on his desk, admiring its glossy ebony finish in the light of his desk lamp. As he turned it over to clean the dust from its underside, he noticed a small metal plate he hadn't seen at the sale, engraved in tiny letters, "M. Graves, 19 Graves, 1938 to 1957. The stories must be told." Thomas ran his fingers over the inscription. Something about the dates bothered him. Graves had disappeared in 1957, but his birth year was wrong. Thomas was certain the author had been born in 1910, not 1938. Must be a production date for the typewriter itself, he reasoned, though the phrasing was odd. He set a blank page into the carriage and typed a few experimental words. The keys moved with surprising fluidity, the sharp clack, 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 oddly satisfying compared to his laptop's whisper-quiet keyboard. He began typing his story about the art thief, but changed course halfway through the first page, suddenly inspired to write something darker, something about death. He worked until his eyes burned, fueled by the last of his bourbon. His head grew heavy, thoughts blurring as exhaustion overtook him. Thomas fell asleep at his desk, head resting next to the typewriter, his half-finished whiskey warming to room temperature. When he woke with a crick in his neck, sunlight streaming through the window, he found the page in the typewriter filled with text. Not just random letters, coherent prose. An entire scene he didn't remember writing. It was good, better than good. It was brilliant. The scene depicted a man drowning in vivid, horrifying detail. Thomas felt a chill as he read the description of water filling lungs, the panic, the slow fade to darkness. He didn't remember writing it, but he must have. Who else could have? That night, Thomas deliberately left a fresh sheet in the typewriter before going to bed properly. In the morning, 3 pages sat neatly stacked beside the machine, continuing his story with another death, a woman trapped in a burning building. The pattern continued night after night. Thomas would wake to find new pages, each describing deaths more creative and horrifying than the last. His novel took shape, a tale of a serial killer with an artistic flair. The prose was elegant, sophisticated, nothing like his usual style. Within weeks, he had a complete manuscript. Dorothy was speechless when he sent it over. She called within hours. "Thomas, what happened? This is nothing like your other work. It's dark, disturbing, even. But God help me, I couldn't stop reading." The book, The Artist's Hand, sold at auction in a bidding war between publishers. Thomas received an advance that erased his debts, and then some. Critics praised its unflinching portrayals of death, the psychological depth, the almost too realistic descriptions of murder, Thomas appeared on talk shows, signed books, and basked in his newfound fame. Life changed quickly after that. Thomas bought a sleek laptop but kept using the typewriter, developing a ritual. He would begin each day by typing a few pages on the Underwood, then transfer them to his computer for editing. The typewriter seemed to buzz with energy when he approached, keys almost eager beneath his fingers. He never questioned where the ideas came from, not when they were making him rich and famous. His second novel, Silent Witness, appeared on his desk in much the same way as the first. He'd wake each morning to find new pages filled with elaborate deaths, intricate murder scenes, and psychological terror that he couldn't consciously remember writing. The book spent 30 weeks on the bestseller list. By his third book, Captive Audience, Thomas had moved into a sprawling Victorian mansion overlooking the coast, not unlike the one where he'd found the typewriter. Photographers from architectural magazines came to document his writer's sanctuary, commenting on the irony that such beautiful spaces could inspire such darkness. His study, lined with first editions and antiques, featured the typewriter prominently on a mahogany desk. "It's my talisman," he told interviewers when they asked about it. Every writer has their superstitions. Years passed. 5 books, 8 books, 12, each more successful than the last, earning Thomas international fame and a fortune he could never have imagined in his struggling days. The New York Times dubbed him the new king of horror, and his novels were translated into 47 languages. 3 had been adapted into films, with more in development. Yet for all his success, Thomas remained alone. He dated occasionally, but never married. His few relationships invariably collapsed when partners complained about his obsessive work habits, the way he would disappear into his study every night and emerge each morning with new pages, sometimes not remembering having written them. The typewriter demanded his attention, and he always chose it over everything else. "I'm married to my work," he would joke in interviews, never mentioning the unnatural pull he felt toward the machine, the way his fingers sometimes moved across the keys without conscious direction. Thomas was nearing 50, his 14th novel just released to critical acclaim, when the first coincidence caught his attention. He was reading the morning newspaper, a habit he maintained despite digital alternatives, when a small article on page 6 stopped him cold. A local hunter had been found dead in the woods, apparently having triggered his own trap and bled to death, unable to free himself. The scene was disturbingly similar to one from Thomas's 4th novel, Patient Hunter. He brushed it off as coincidence until a week later when he stumbled across an archived article from 6 years earlier, around the time his 5th book released, describing a woman who died from gradual poisoning by a rare plant growing in her garden. The details matched Chapter 10 of Beautiful Endings with unsettling precision. Curiosity became obsession. Thomas hired private investigators to search newspapers and death records in regions where his books had been released. He created a sprawling timeline across his study wall, connecting deaths to his novels with red string and index cards. The evidence became impossible to ignore. For every elaborate death scene in his books, a corresponding real-world death followed within months of publication. The methods, the circumstances, the small details, all matching his fictional accounts with statistical impossibility. Most disturbing were the victims, ordinary people with no connection to Thomas or each other. A banker in Oregon, a teacher in Florida, a mechanic in Illinois. People who might have read his books, who might have been influenced by the detailed descriptions of death. But some had died in remote areas where his books hadn't even been translated. How had he known? How had the typewriter known? Thomas's research into Mitchell graves became frantic. He purchased rare first editions, tracked down old newspaper clippings, and even interviewed elderly relatives of Graves's acquaintances. The similarities were undeniable. Graves, too, had written best-selling novels featuring elaborate deaths. And for each fictional death, a matching real-world tragedy had followed. Graves had written 12 novels before his disappearance. Thomas was completing his 15th. One night, after too many drinks and too many hours staring at his wall of evidence, Thomas turned the typewriter over to examine the metal plate once more. His glass shattered on the hardwood floor. Where it had once read M. Graves, 1938 to 1957, The stories must be told, it now said. T. Reed, 1988 to 2025. The stories must be told. Thomas dropped the typewriter, his hands shaking violently. His birth date, 1988, and a death date, 2025. Just months away. With trembling fingers, he yanked the ribbon from the typewriter and locked the machine in his basement storage room. He couldn't be part of this. Whatever unholy connection existed between the typewriter's stories and real death, he had to break it. But when he woke in the morning, the typewriter sat on his desk, a fresh ribbon installed, a new page loaded with text describing the death of a novelist who thought he could break the chain. Thomas recognized his own address in the description. Panic seized him. He grabbed a hammer from his workshop and swung it down on the typewriter with all his strength. The first blow cracked the frame. The second shattered keys across his desk. He continued until the machine was reduced to broken plastic and twisted metal. That night, he slept easier than he had in months. But in the pale light of dawn, Thomas's scream echoed through his mansion. The typewriter sat on his desk, pristine and untouched, as if the previous night's destruction had been nothing but a dream. He drove to the nearest lake, the typewriter heavy in a canvas bag beside him. At the deepest part, he hurled it into the water, watching until the ripples faded completely. When he returned home, the typewriter was waiting on his desk, dripping water onto his hardwood floor. Now Thomas sits at his desk, staring at the vintage Underwood. His latest novel, The Final Page, releases tomorrow. It features 6 elaborate murders, each described in loving detail. 6 deaths that will soon make headlines unless he can find a way to stop what he's started. The typewriter keys begin to move on their own, metal arms rising and falling with sharp, decisive clacks. Thomas watches, paralyzed, as a new story takes shape, one about a desperate author who sells a haunted typewriter at an estate sale to a struggling young writer named Catherine Mills. The last line appears slowly, one deliberate keystroke at a time. The stories must be told. A man who thought he'd found the shortcut to literary greatness, only to discover he was merely the latest chapter in an ongoing manuscript of horror. A temporary caretaker of dark stories demanding to be told, fulfilling a cycle that began long before him and will continue long after. There exists a moment in every person's life when desperation overwhelms reason, when the desire for retribution blinds us to consequences. It's at this precise intersection of bitterness and opportunity that we find Caleb Hargrove, a man whose resentment has festered like an open wound. His story is not merely one of greed, but of vengeance against a past that refused to release him. Tonight, we follow him to a lonely crossroads where wishes aren't granted, they're twisted into nightmares. A glimpse into madness awaits those who shake hands with darkness. The old truck sputtered once, twice, then died with a wheezing rattle that echoed across the endless Nebraska countryside. Miles of wheat and corn stretched in every direction, golden under the setting sun. No houses, no cell towers. Just Caleb Hargrove and his broken-down Chevy at a desolate crossroads. Caleb slammed his palm against the steering wheel. At 43, his face carried the weathered lines of a man who'd spent too many years fighting uphill battles. He climbed out and kicked the tire, unleashing a string of curses that disappeared into the empty landscape. It had been like this for 30 years. Ever since his father, the great Richard Hargrove, had died suddenly, leaving behind not the legacy of business prowess everyone believed, but mountains of debt, evidence of fraud, and the shattered remnants of what should have been Caleb's inheritance. The town still had a Hargrove Boulevard, still had the Hargrove Memorial Scholarship, still spoke of old Richard with reverence while his widow worked 2 jobs at the diner and the motel, breaking her back until arthritis bent her fingers into painful hooks. Caleb never finished college, never got that business degree. Instead, he bounced between jobs, construction, sales, bartending, always carrying the weight of his father's invisible shame. "If I had money," he muttered, leaning against the truck's hood, "none of this would have happened. Mom wouldn't have worked herself half to death. I wouldn't be stuck in this goddamn town where everyone knows what Dad did." The wind picked up, rustling through the corn stalks with an eerie whisper. Caleb wiped sweat from his brow and looked down the empty road. As twilight deepened, he could almost feel the weight of darkness pressing down upon him. Then, impossibly, a trail of dust appeared on the horizon. Caleb squinted, watching as the glint off the polished chrome got closer. Not a pickup or farm vehicle, but something low and sleek that seemed to glide rather than drive. The vehicle, a black luxury sedan with windows tinted so dark they appeared solid, pulled alongside his truck. The engine quieted. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the back door opened. A man stepped out, tall and immaculately dressed in a suit that shimmered with the quality of expensive fabric. His shoes, polished to a mirror shine, somehow remained pristine despite the dusty road. His face, handsome, angular, with eyes that seemed to reflect no light, wore an expression of pleasant concern. "Rough day?" the man asked. "Seems you've been asking the world for a little help," his voice cultured and smooth. "Car trouble," Caleb replied, instantly defensive. Something about this stranger made the hair on his arms stand up. "I'll figure it out." The man smiled, stepping closer. "You were hoping for more than just automotive assistance, weren't you? I heard you quite clearly." He gestured toward the horizon. "Even out here, words carry, especially heartfelt ones." Caleb stiffened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The richest man in town," the stranger replied simply. "That's what you want to be, to erase your father's shame, to show them all." The wind died completely. The silence that followed seemed unnatural, as if the world itself held its breath. "Who are you?" Caleb asked, his voice barely audible. The man ignored the question. Instead, he moved toward the truck and placed one perfectly manicured hand on the hood. The metal ticked and groaned under his touch, and then, impossibly, the engine roared to life. Not the usual sputtering start, but a smooth, powerful purr it hadn't produced in years. "I offer deals," the man said, turning back to Caleb. "You said you wanted to be the richest man in town. I can make that happen." Desperation and desire clouded Caleb's judgment. 30 years of resentment. 30 years of watching his mother struggle while his father's portrait still hung in the town hall. 30 years of being the son of a respected man whose respect was built on lies. "Hell yes," Caleb said, the words tumbling out before he could reconsider. "Do it." The stranger extended his hand. Caleb hesitated for just a moment before grasping it. The man's skin was cold, dry, like parchment left too long in the sun. As their hands clasped, Caleb felt a jolt, not electrical, but something deeper, something that seemed to reach into his very core. "The deal is made," the man said, his smile widening to reveal perfect teeth. "You'll be the richest man in town by morning." He released Caleb's hand, returned to his black car, and drove away, leaving Caleb standing alone at the crossroads with his miraculously repaired truck. The drive home was uneventful. Caleb kept expecting to feel different, wealthier, somehow, but he felt only the same nagging doubt and exhaustion that had plagued him for years. He fell asleep in his small apartment above the hardware store, wondering if he'd imagined the entire encounter. Morning arrived with the shrill ring of his phone. "Caleb, are you watching the news?" His mother's voice trembled with fear. "Something terrible is happening." Caleb fumbled for the remote, clicking on the local station. The news anchor's face was grave as she reported on what could only be described as a financial catastrophe. The regional bank had collapsed overnight. Real estate values had plummeted. The hospital was closing its doors. Businesses were shutting down across the county. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, panic rising in his throat. "They're evicting me, Caleb. The building's been sold. Everyone has to leave by the end of the week." Cold dread settled in his stomach. This couldn't be what the stranger meant. It couldn't be. After promising his mother he'd come right over, Caleb checked his bank account. The balance remained unchanged, $243.07. Hardly the fortune he'd expected. He was about to close the app when a notification appeared. It wasn't from his bank, but from a financial news service he'd never subscribed to. Net worth rankings update. Caleb Hargrove, #1 in town. He stared at the screen, uncomprehending. Then understanding dawned with horrifying clarity. He was the richest man in town, not because he had gained wealth, but because everyone else had lost everything. The streets were chaos. People wandered in shock or gathered in angry clusters. Signs were being hastily erected on storefronts. Closed. Liquidation. Bankruptcy. At the corner, a man in a business suit sat on the curb, head in his hands. Caleb drove to his mother's apartment building, where residents were already packing their belongings into cars. She stood on the front steps, surrounded by trash bags filled with her meager possessions. Her shoulders, and always proud despite years of hardship, now slumped in defeat. "I don't understand," she said, her voice hollow. 30 years in this town, and now we're out on the street." Before Caleb could respond, his phone rang again. Sabrina, his ex-wife. They'd divorced 5 years ago, but shared a son, Jamie, 16, who suffered from diabetes. "This your fault?" Sabrina's voice was razor-sharp with accusation. "The pharmacy's closed. Jamie's insulin, we can't get it. The hospital's turning people away. What the hell is happening?" "I didn't," Caleb began, but she cut him off. "You always were a goddamn jinx. You're just like your father, a grifter in a cheap coat." The call ended abruptly. Caleb stood frozen, his mother watching him with concern. "What did she mean? Your fault?" she asked. He couldn't tell her. Couldn't explain the crossroads, the stranger, the deal. It sounded insane even to him. "I need to fix this," he said instead. "I'll be back soon." The town hall was surrounded by protesters when he arrived. Through the crowd, he spotted Mayor Wilson emerging from the building, flanked by security. Caleb pushed his way through. "Mayor Wilson, I need to talk to you." The mayor turned, his face lighting with unexpected relief. "Hargrove, thank God. We need your help. The city's coffers are empty. The emergency fund, pensions, everything, gone overnight." "My help?" Caleb repeated, confused. "Well, yes. Everyone knows you're the only one who came out ahead in all this. The richest man in town now, aren't you? We need you to step up like your father would have." The irony was so bitter, Caleb could taste it. His father, who had hidden his financial crimes until death, was still being held up as the standard of civic virtue. And now Caleb, who had nothing to give, was expected to save them all. Desperate for answers, he drove to St. Michael's Church on the edge of town. Father Donovan had known his father, had delivered the eulogy that painted Richard Hargrove as a pillar of the community. If anyone could help Caleb understand what was happening, what he had done, surely it would be the priest. But the church doors were locked. Father Donovan stood outside, hammering plywood over the stained glass windows. "Father," Caleb called, hurrying up the steps. "What are you doing?" The priest turned, his face gaunt with exhaustion. "Securing the building. Without the parishioners' donations, we can't keep the lights on, and with what's happening in town..." He shook his head. "Some are already calling it a punishment. Divine retribution." "For what?" Caleb asked, his voice barely audible. Father Donovan's eyes were sad. "Pride, perhaps. Greed, the sins of the fathers." He turned back to his work. "Sometimes, Mr. Hargrove, the devil is in the details." The phrase sent a chill through Caleb. He backed away from the church, then ran to his truck. There was only one place to go now, back to the crossroads where it had all begun. The sun was setting again, painting the horizon in shades of blood and fire, as Caleb pulled his truck to a stop at the exact spot where he'd met the stranger. The field seemed darker now, the corn stalks casting long shadows that stretched toward him like accusatory fingers. "I know you're here," he shouted into the gathering darkness. "Show yourself." The air thickened, shimmered, and then the stranger was there, standing a few feet away as if he'd been there all along. But he wasn't quite the same. His elegant suit seemed to absorb the fading light. His face, still handsome, now held something ancient and terrible in its features. "How wonderful, the sins of the father and the sins of the son," the stranger said, his voice resonating with unnatural depth. "What are you talking about?" Caleb shouted, on the verge of tears, desperation dripping from every syllable. "You both wanted a shortcut to riches. He was just a better negotiator than you. You wanted to be the richest man in town, and now you are. You have nothing to complain about." "Undo it," Caleb pleaded, falling to his knees. "I'll give you my soul. Just fix this." The stranger, the thing that wore the shape of a man, smiled. Its teeth were no longer perfect, but sharp, numerous, wrong. "That's not how it works. I already own you. However," it paused, considering, "if you deliver me another soul, I'll undo the damage." Caleb shook his head, more confused than ever. "What soul?" "The boy's will do nicely, a promising one, young, malleable, fair trade." Horror washed over Caleb. "No, not Jamie, never." "Then our business is concluded." The thing turned away. "Wait," Caleb cried. "There must be something else, anything." But the stranger was already gone, leaving Caleb alone in the darkness. He drove back to town like a man possessed, speeding towards Sabrina's house. He had to warn her, to protect Jamie. When he arrived, the house was dark except for a single lamp in the living room. Through the window, he could see Sabrina pacing, phone pressed to her ear. Caleb burst through the door. "Where's Jamie?" Sabrina whirled, her face contorted with anger and fear. "Get out! Haven't you done enough?" "Listen to me," Caleb insisted. "Jamie's in danger. We have to." "The only danger to my son is you," she spat. "Always creating chaos, always destroying everything you touch. Sabrina, please. There's something out there, something that did this to the town, and now it wants Jamie." Her expression shifted from anger to concern, not for him, but for his sanity. She moved toward the phone. "I'm calling Dr. Mendez. You need help, Caleb." Before she could reach it, something caught her attention outside the window. A black car idling by the curb, a tall figure standing beside it. The stranger had returned to his more human form. Gone were the mouthful of sharp teeth and glowing eyes. "You," she whispered, moving past Caleb toward the door. "You're the one behind this?" Caleb grabbed her arm. "Don't go out there. Don't talk to him." She wrenched free. "If he can fix this, if he can help Jamie, that's what he wants you to think. He's not what he seems." But Sabrina was already opening the door, stepping into the night. Caleb followed, desperate to stop her. They found the stranger waiting in the small front yard, perfectly at ease beneath the streetlight. "You want my son?" Sabrina demanded, her voice quavering. "You misunderstand, madam," the stranger replied smoothly. "That was the deal I offered Caleb. I'm no monster. I would never tear a child from his mother. What I'm offering is a gift, all the wealth back, the town restored, and yes, your son, perfectly healthy, no more insulin, no more hospitals. In exchange, I want your soul to complete the set." Caleb took her by the shoulders. "Do not agree." Sabrina hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, I'll do it, for him." The moment the words left her lips, the earth beneath them rumbled. Iron chains, glowing red hot, erupted from the ground, snaking around Caleb's and Sabrina's ankles. They looked down in horror as the metal cooled and hardened, binding them together. "What the hell?" Caleb began. "I never said you'd be free." The stranger, now fully revealed as something ancient and terrible, replied with a grin that split his face unnaturally wide. "You two made quite the pair once. Won't it be lovely to spend eternity together?" The world around them began to fade. The house, the street, the town, all dissolving like mist. Caleb reached out for something, anything to hold on to, but there was nothing. Only Sabrina, chained to him, and the thing that had tricked them both. "Enjoy your wealth," Caleb Hargrove, the devil whispered as they vanished. "You're now the richest soul in hell." By morning, the financial catastrophe had mysteriously reversed. Banks reopened, businesses recovered, and the town began to heal. People spoke of a glitch, a computer error, a near miss. Within weeks, the incident was reduced to an anecdote, a strange blip in the town's history. Caleb and Sabrina Hargrove were never seen again. Their disappearance remained a mystery, briefly investigated, then quietly filed away as unsolved. In their absence, young Jamie woke to find himself completely healthy for the first time in his life. No more insulin injections, no more late-night emergencies or hospital visits. The doctors called it a medical miracle. They ran tests, shook their heads, and shrugged. Jamie didn't question it. He just lived. He never spoke of the dream he had the night his parents vanished, a dream of them standing side by side again, bound together by heavy chains, watching him from across a great distance. They didn't speak in the dream, but their eyes said everything: love, regret, sacrifice. The town recovered quickly. Property values bounced back, stores reopened, the hospital restaffed. Most people were eager to forget the strange week of chaos and collapse, chalking it up to a banking glitch or cyber attack. Some whispered that it had been divine punishment. Others blamed the government. But no one had any proof, and so the story faded. Except for one thing. At the lonely crossroads outside town where Caleb's truck had once died and fate had turned a cruel corner, people still claimed strange things happened. Engines stalled for no reason. Phone signals vanished. And always, if you waited long enough, a dust trail might appear on the horizon. A sleek black car, a man in a perfect suit, and a voice that offered exactly what you thought you needed most. In the ledger of life, where our debts and desires are tallied with unforgiving precision, Caleb Hargrove discovered too late that vengeance is a currency that bankrupts the soul. His story reminds us that when we seek to right the wrongs of the past through darkness, we risk becoming the very thing we despise. Perhaps the true wealth in this world isn't measured in dollars or status, but in the wisdom to recognize that some prices are too high to pay, even for justice, especially for justice. Picture a world where charm is currency and deceit pays dividends. Tonight we meet Thatcher Vale, a man who has perfected the confidence game, preying on those already wounded by loss. His weapons: a smile, a lie, and the promise of companionship. Little does he know that in a mansion at the edge of town waits a game far more ancient than his own, where the hunter becomes the hunted, and eternity offers a glimpse into madness. Thatcher Vale adjusted his silk tie in the diner's bathroom mirror. The face that looked back at him was handsome in a weathered way, distinguished silver at the temples, laugh lines that suggested warmth rather than the calculation behind them. Perfect for the widows. They always responded to a face that carried experience but promised vitality. He'd been in Willow Creek for 3 days now, watching, waiting. The obituaries had been fruitful. This sleepy southern town had buried 4 wealthy men in the past year alone, leaving behind fortunes and fragile hearts. Thatcher had made his living from such hearts, seducing and abandoning grieving women with such practiced elegance that most never reported him, too ashamed of their folly to admit they'd been fleeced. Returning to his booth, Thatcher opened the local newspaper, circling another notice with his pen. 2 waitresses whispered behind the counter, their voices carrying in the quiet morning. "Did you see her yesterday?" Mrs. Marin was shopping for another suit at Henderson's, full formal attire, with cufflinks and everything. "Hush now," the older waitress cautioned, glancing around. "Poor woman's just lonely since Mr. Gregory passed." Lonely? She's plain disturbed. 6 husbands, all dead within a year of marriage, and she keeps those things seated at her dining table, like dolls dressed in their clothes. They're just mannequins, Ruth, for comfort. "My cousin cleaned there once," said one of them, blinked. Thatcher's pen stopped mid-circle. He folded the paper deliberately, leaving a crisp $10 bill under his coffee cup as he exited the diner. Outside, the Carolina summer heat pressed down, but he felt a peculiar chill as he watched an elderly woman emerge from the general store across the street. She moved with surprising grace for someone who must have been well past 70. Her white hair was impeccably styled, her linen dress crisp despite the humidity. When she turned slightly, catching his gaze, Thatcher was startled by her eyes, amber and keen like a hawk's. The woman smiled, a subtle quirk of thin lips that seemed both invitation and challenge. Thatcher Vale had found his mark. Over the next week, Thatcher orchestrated what appeared to be chance encounters with Althea Marin, the library, where he accidentally knocked over her stack of historical romance novels, the park, where he happened to occupy the only other bench with a view of the duck pond, the church fundraiser, where he outbid everyone for a pie she had baked. Althea received his attention with amused detachment. She wasn't naive, she knew she was being pursued, but rather than rejecting his advances, she seemed to enjoy being desired. It made her feel young again. "Mr. Vale," she said on their 3rd meeting, accepting a bouquet of lilies with gloved hands, "I suspect you've heard the gossip about me." Thatcher affected innocence. "I try not to indulge in small-town talk, Mrs. Marin. Althea, please." Her smile was thin but genuine, "and you should absolutely indulge. What the hell else are we supposed to do in a place like this?" Thatcher laughed out loud. "You're too much, Althea. I agree. Let people talk, I don't care. Perhaps I simply recognize a kindred spirit when I see one. Someone who understands the value of companionship." Althea's amber eyes glinted. "Indeed, I do value companionship, Mr. Vale, which is why I'd like to invite you to dinner tomorrow evening, 8 o'clock, the house at the end of Azalea Lane. You can't miss it." The Marin estate loomed against the twilight sky like a decaying tooth, once grand, now slowly surrendering to time. Vines crawled up its brick facade, and the windows gleamed with eerie warmth. Thatcher approached the massive oak door, carrying a bottle of expensive Burgundy. His knock was answered almost immediately, as if Althea had been waiting just behind the door. She looked different tonight. Her white hair was arranged in an elegant coiffure, her dress a deep emerald that might have been fashionable 3 decades ago, yet something about her seemed refreshed, as if she'd drawn energy from the anticipation of his arrival. "Welcome, Mr. Vale," she said, stepping aside. "Do come in. Everyone is waiting." Everyone? The foyer opened into a grand hall with a sweeping staircase and crystal chandelier that must have once been magnificent, but now hung with cobwebs like frozen tears. Althea led him through to the dining room, where a long mahogany table was set for 8. 6 men were already seated. Thatcher froze in the doorway. 6 figures in impeccable evening wear sat motionless around the table. At first glance, they might have been wax figures or mannequins, so still were they in their chairs. But there was something wrong with their skin, too waxy, too tight around the joints. Their eyes stared vacantly at fine china plates. "My husbands," Althea announced with undisguised pride. "They so look forward to company. We have so few visitors." Thatcher's mind raced through possibilities. A strange joke? Mental illness? An elaborate test? Whatever the case, he'd played along with stranger scenarios for a worthwhile score. And Althea's estate, fated though it might be, promised substantial rewards. How unconventional, he managed, summoning his most charming smile. "Please, sit here beside me." Althea gestured to an empty chair at her right. "Gregory won't mind. He's always been the generous one." As Thatcher moved toward the chair, one of the figures, a gray-haired man in a navy suit, seemed to turn its head toward him. The movement was almost imperceptible, but Thatcher would have sworn the thing blinked. Thatcher shook off the thought. They're just creepy mannequins, nothing more. Throughout dinner, Althea served course after course from silver trays brought by unseen servants. The food was excellent, but Thatcher found it difficult to eat with 6 pairs of vacant eyes that occasionally, impossibly, seemed to track his movements. Althea poured wine into ornate crystal goblets. "A toast," she declared, raising her glass, "to new friends and old loves." She watched intently as Thatcher sipped. Her own glass remained untouched. Althea shared stories of each husband, their courtships, their careers, their charming quirks. She spoke of them in the present tense, as if they still lived and breathed, occasionally pausing to address questions to the figures who never answered. Despite the strangeness, Thatcher persisted. The prize was too valuable to abandon. He'd glimpsed the jewelry, the antiques, the safe behind the library painting. He couldn't believe his luck. This score would set him up for years. "They like you," Althea told him as she showed him through her library. "I can tell. They get restless when they like someone." She pushed open another door in the seemingly unending house. "This is my private collection. Few have seen it." The room beyond was filled with glass cases containing personal effects, watches, rings, fountain pens, cufflinks, each labeled with a name and date, the same names as her husband's. The dates of death all fell within 12 months of marriage. "My treasures," Althea whispered, standing too close. "Every gentleman leaves something behind." Thatcher's expression could hardly contain his excitement. Althea was clearly insane, perhaps dangerous. The husbands were elaborate dolls, he was certain, though he couldn't explain their occasional movements, some mechanical trick, perhaps. Regardless, he'd seen enough to know where the valuables were kept. He formulated his plan: suggest a nightcap, drug her wine, then pillage the estate while she slept. By morning, he'd be 3 states away with a new identity and a fortune in antiques and jewelry. "How about one last drink before I head home?" Thatcher suggested. Althea smiled and rubbed her hands together. "I have the perfect choice." The husbands sat in mute attendance. Althea retrieved a dusty bottle from the liquor cabinet. "A special blend from the old country," she explained, "reserved for significant occasions." She handed him the bottle to inspect and placed 2 glasses on the table in front of him. "I have something for you," she announced as she turned to find something buried in a stack of old books. While her back was turned, Thatcher dropped a small pill into one of the glasses and filled them both with the golden brown liquid. She returned to him with a silver lapel pin. "I've had this for years, but none of my husbands ever wanted to wear it." She pinned it to his jacket and stood back to admire the decoration. "It looks perfect on you." They sat on the sofa, and Thatcher handed her the drugged glass of booze. "Thank you, sweetheart." He raised his glass. "To new friendships." He downed his drink in one gulp, but she daintily put the glass to her lips. She seemed to fake taking a sip. The liquid burned down his throat like liquid fire, then spread a numbing cold through his limbs. His vision blurred. The room seemed to expand and contract. "You are a sneaky one." Althea's voice came from very far away. She held her glass up to the light and could see the particles of whatever drug he had slipped her swirling in the liquid. "That's okay. I really don't blame you. It'll just give you and the other gentlemen something to talk about while I'm away." She smiled and tapped his nose. Thatcher tried to stand, but found his legs unresponsive. His arms hung leaden at his sides. "Interesting, isn't it?" Althea continued, rising from her chair. As she stood, something changed. Her stooped posture straightened, the wrinkles around her eyes smoothed. Her white hair darkened at the roots, color bleeding upward like ink in water. "They say that wine reveals the truth, Thatcher, shows things as they really are." She circled behind him, her hands, no longer gnarled with age, coming to rest on his shoulders. "You came here to take something from me, but all you brought was a gift." Thatcher's mouth worked, but no sound emerged. His entire body was rigid now, frozen in his seat. "I know men like you, Thatcher. I've known many. Men who see loneliness as weakness, who feed on grief and vulnerability." Her voice had changed too, deeper, resonant with something ancient. "But I'm not the lonely one here. I'm never alone." Through paralyzed eyes, Thatcher watched in horror as the husbands began to move. Slowly at first, but then with increasing fluidity. Their vacant eyes filled with awareness and agony. "You wonder what they are?" Althea, or whatever she was, whispered in his ear. "They're not dolls. They're not dead. They're preserved. Their essence feeds me. Their life force sustains me. Their company entertains me." She moved into his field of vision, now fully transformed. Where an elderly woman had stood was now a creature of terrible beauty, youthful, radiant, her amber eyes glowing with unnatural light. "They were predators, like you, men who thought themselves clever, who chose me as their mark." She smiled, revealing teeth too sharp for a human mouth. "But I've been playing this game for centuries." Horror dawned on Thatcher as one of the husbands, the one nearest him, leaned forward with jerky, puppet-like movements. His mouth opened in what might have been a grimace or a smile. "Welcome," came the cracked whisper. Althea clapped her hands with childlike delight. "Oh, they do like you. They haven't spoken in ages." She snapped her fingers and unseen servants emerged from the shadows, carrying a tuxedo on a silver platter. "Every gentleman deserves proper attire for eternity," she said as cold hands began to undress him. "Don't worry about struggling. The paralysis is temporary. The awareness, however, that's forever." Thatcher Vale, outfitted in midnight blue, took his place at the table. His mind screamed in silent horror as Althea, young and vibrant, stood before a gilded mirror, admiring her reflection. Behind her, 7 men sat upright in their chairs, tears tracking down immobile cheeks, eyes wide with eternal awareness. "Much better," she murmured, touching her newly smoothed cheek. "Much, much better." Thatcher Vale discovered too late that some predators wear their age like a costume and their loneliness like bait. In his arrogance, he failed to recognize that he was never the hunter, merely the next course in an endless feast. Remember that those who make their living consuming the vulnerable may one day find themselves at a table where they are not the diner, but the dinner.